Hey, welcome back PetaPixel viewers. It is Chris Nichols here, and you may have heard that Sigma is now releasing a lot of their lens designs for Fujifilm X-Mount. Well, today we've got the Sigma 100 to 400. We're gonna try it out here today. Take some pictures of some animals. So there's a bit of an interesting story with this lens because the Sigma 100 to 400 was originally intended to be a full frame lens. It covers full frame sensors, and it was released for Sony E-mount cameras and L-mount cameras, but now it's adapted to the Fujifilm X-Mount and its APS-C size sensor. Now this has some interesting ramifications. We're going to talk about that. You would normally expect a full frame lens to be quite heavy, but the closest competition to this is going to be the Fujifilm 100 to 400. Now the Fujifilm is about a third of a stop brighter at both ends, 100 and 400. This is absolutely not a fast lens, but this lens is quite lightweight. I mean, the Sigma 100 400 is just over 1100 grams, just over half a knock. It's actually a fair amount lighter than the Fujifilm 100 to 400. So even though it's full frame, it's quite light and compact. But what about other compromises? Are there issues with optical performance? Is it sharp? Let's go test that. Oh, I should mention that today I'm shooting on the Fujifilm X-T3. Big thanks to the camera store for letting us borrow that. So the autofocus isn't state of the art as far as Fujifilm goes. However, there's still a majority of cameras using this 26 megapixel sensor. It's got good detail, so I think it'll be a good test for this 100 or 400. I think I got that beat on a good day. So the lens itself is only a 67mm filter thread. It really is quite compact to carry. Nice little hood provided with the lens. However, they do not provide you with a lens collar. Instead, you get this rubber ring which covers up the lugs for the lens collar. That's too bad because, of course, if I'm hand holding the lens, it's light enough. Like today, I don't need a lens collar. But when I was doing test chart shots on a tripod, I really could have used it. That was quite annoying just because it was so unbalanced and it always wanted to sag downwards. Now, the focus button on here has an autofocus option and then an autofocus lock option on the switch, and that's because your main overrides on most Fujifilm bodies will be down here. Of course, I got a focus limiter from 6 meters to infinity, or just from the closest focusing to 6 meters. I do have a customizable function button here, and this lens is image stabilized, so I've got my usual off, or I've got all directions, or sport mode where I can easily pan. Zoom rings feel nice and smooth. Manual focus is well dampened. This lens is fully weather sealed as well. So as a professional telephoto, it's actually pretty well appointed. So what could be more frustrating than trying to get bees on a 600mm equivalent lens at minimum focusing distance? Well, luckily I've had some success. Oh, there he is. I'm just gonna move in here to my minimum focusing distance of 1.5 meters. I gotcha. So 1.5 meters at 400mm is where this lens does its best work. And you know, it's 1 to 4 life-size reduction on a full frame sensor. Here, of course, I've got the crop body. So magnification's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. The image stabilizer's keeping things nice and stable. It is a little bit tricky, of course, to focus at those distances automatically. So right now I'm just rocking back and forth the manual focus. But in a pinch, it is doable to get some decent macro shots with this lens. So let's talk about focus breathing, which in a recent PetaPixel article, Sigma said wasn't really that important, but I still want to evaluate on this lens. And actually, as you can see here, focus breathing is present, but it's actually quite minimal. So for video focus pulls, this does a good job. Now, one thing I'm noticing here, we've got stepping motors in this lens, and so it's smooth focusing, but it's not the fastest. Now, if I'm already at a distance, focusing, you know, on a bear or a wolf or something, it's actually doing quite a good job because it doesn't have to move very far to change the plane of focus. But if I'm shooting close up, or if there's certain situations where the lens just goes all the way out of focus, getting it to go all the way back can be quite slow, especially compared to something like the Fujifilm 100 or 400, which has a linear motor in it. So let's next talk about flare and ghosting. So shooting this lens towards bright light sources or the sun, we are getting some loss of contrast. It's not too bad. Sigma coatings always do a good job. However, when it comes to ghosting, this lens actually has some pretty severe ghosting. You can see here, you got to stop down quite a ways. F11, F16 is where you really start to see it, but it is quite distracting. It's quite random, lots lots of green balls everywhere and stuff. Now that being said, a long telephoto lens like this isn't something that you often really need to worry about shooting towards the sun. You know, if it's outside the frame, we got a really nice hood to block that extraneous light. It's rare that we're going to shoot this towards bright light sources on purpose, but if you do, keep the aperture wide open, try to avoid those ghosts. So of course an extreme telephoto like the Sigma 100-400 is great for wildlife, sports, and action shots, but I also really like it for landscapes, particularly doing panoramic stitches. I take lots of photos with the telephoto, combine them together, and I can actually get a beautiful wide angle image. So I had a really good opportunity for this because we had a rainy, misty day over Calgary, lots of fog, but the sun was just poking over the skyline. I thought I'd make a nice stitch, and I had an opportunity to use a brand new software from Skylum, their Luminar Neo software. They have a new panoramic stitching extension plugin, very easy. I mean, I just took a bunch of raw files, dragged and dropped the folder in, it automatically stitched them with no seams. I could auto crop it out. They also have an HDR option if you want to do that with HDR photos as well to really get more dynamic range. You can even import video footage into this same panoramic stitching extension. It'll pull video frames and build a nice seamless panorama from it. You can also choose a subject or object in your video footage, and then it will intelligently use that as the main subject and build a panorama around it. In the end, I then took the image and I edited it to black and white, made some changes overall using Luminar Neo, and it was very easy to get through. I hope you like the result. So slow telephoto lenses like this aren't exactly a bokeh-rific kind of application when it comes to out of focus areas, but you know, we still want to analyze it because you can still get shallow depth of field just given how telephoto this lens is, and it does play a big part if you're shooting wildlife or, you know, insects or something, and you do have those backgrounds. You want them to be soft. So first off, looking at specular highlights, here at f5.6, you can see a little bit of cat's eye there in the corners. It's not bad. Stopping down to f8 does actually give us nice round specular highlights. Now the specular highlights actually do have quite a soap bubble effect to them, and onion rings as well, and these aren't normally desirable traits. But that being said, with a telephoto like this, specular highlights are always going to be small in the frame. They're not often even be seen in the frame, and despite the fact that there are the soap bubble effect and onion rings in the bokeh, actually the transition from in focus to out of focus is really quite smooth, and the out of focus areas don't look energetic or distracting. So overall, I'd actually say for wildlife applications, it has really nice rendition of out of focus areas. All right, let's talk sharpness now. So first off, at 100 millimeters, shooting here wide open at f5, actually really nice detail. Stopping down to f8 does have some improvements. When we look at the corners shooting wide open, it's actually still very decent, and stopping down again improves contrast and sharpness slightly, but I would happily shoot this lens wide open at 100 millimeters. Looking at 400 millimeters, it's basically the same story. Really good detail here at f6.3, you know, in the centers, nice and sharp. Stopping down to f8, you can't really stop down much more than that because you're going to get into diffraction. So again, slight improvement stopping down. Same thing with the corners, shooting wide open at 6.3, good decent performance, and slight improvement stopping down. So really this is a lens that I don't get a lot of working range from wide open to stop down until diffraction sets in, but at the same time the lens is sharp pretty much anywhere. Now one thing I will note, the corners were surprisingly good, but remember this lens is a full frame coverage lens, and this sensor is cropping in tighter to the, you know, better parts of the image circle, so any of the problems of the corners, they're largely cropped away. You know, we always talk about getting lenses that are made specifically for the sensor size of your camera, because in the case of an APS-C lens, it should be more compact, smaller, lighter, easier to carry around. But the fact is that the basic competitor to this particular lens is the Fujifilm 100-400, and that's quite a bit heavier, quite a bit larger. It's dramatically more expensive, and so I was actually overall really impressed with this particular lens. You know, I will say there was a lot of situations where I was shooting those butterflies, or I'm shooting indoors, and I'm going up to 6400 ISO or 12800 ISO, and of course that's rough on an APS-C camera, but if I had the Fujifilm 100-400, I only be a third of a stop faster. It still would be pretty noisy. So I think if you're a wildlife shooter, you're looking for a good, affordable telephoto lens that gives you that sort of 600 millimeter full frame equivalent, this is probably the way I'd go. This is a great choice. If it was sports and action, I needed the fastest focusing possible, maybe look at the Fujifilm lens with its linear motors. As always, I appreciate you joining us for another review here. I hope you found this useful, helps you decide if this is a good choice for you to get for your Fujifilm X-Mount camera. Leave your comments below. Please subscribe to the channel, give us a like, check out our social media stuff. We'd appreciate that too. And do listen to our podcast. You can see it on the same channel, or go to all your favorite podcasting apps, put in PetaPixel Podcast, and you'll find that. We're on a roll, it's doing great, and we'd love for you to join us there. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon next time with more episodes on PetaPixel.